Hello everyone! Guess what? You have made it to the final video for this course. So, we're going to be wrapping up assessment by looking at some best practices and things about evaluating your assessment. So, hold tight. This is our last one, and yes, as strange as it may sound, this is part 2 of part 2 on assessment. So let's start with some effective assessment practices. Since assessment is something we all need to do, what are some things to keep in mind to do it well? Starting with planning. You do need to plan all these things in advance. Just like you need to plan your learning activities, you also need to plan your assessments. You want to make sure that not only do they align with your learning objectives, but they also align with what was actually taught in the class. All these things need to be pointed in the same direction. So kind of like this meme, reviews easy questions for the exam but gives you the hardest ones. That also doesn't work. And that meme actually connects to our next one, which is this idea of preparing your students. The example before of showing easy questions but then giving hard ones, that doesn't adequately prepare your students. You need to inform them of not only the format of the test, but also the content. What should they study? So this idea when you start the test and suddenly it's all essay questions. Remember, we saw previously the way students study is connected to what they're preparing for. You study for essay exams differently than you do multiple choice ones. So they need to know what they're getting into. And you should probably give them some sort of help when it comes to test-taking skills. What do you know about their study skills? How do they study? How should they study for your test? All of that can help prepare them for your exams. I think this also goes along with the idea of don't make assumptions about your students. Don't assume that they know what the test is going to be like or assume that they know how to study for it. You need to help prepare them. Also, do what you can to provide them some practice. Whether this is in the guise of exam reviews, practice questions, review games, or different types of assessments. Like for instance, you might notice before some of the exams in our class, I'll have multiple, hopefully at least one set of practice questions for you to look at. It'll get you used to the format of the questions and help you perhaps spot where some of your challenges might be. And still keeping in line with preparing your students, I think it's important to note that the more of this you do, the less anxiety your students are going to have on test day. It will improve their confidence and also their performance. Because if you do want an assessment to be a true measure of what your students actually know, they need to be prepared and they need to be in the best position for the assessment to truly evaluate their knowledge. And, you know, as you probably know, test anxiety is a real thing. It is possible for students to blank out when you give them the test. It is possible for them to feel that this exam is this lofty thing, even when you're telling them that it's not. So the more you can do to prepare them and boost that confidence, the better they're going to feel. All right, when it comes to administering your assessments, you want to make sure that you're giving them very clear instructions. Okay, so, have you ever felt this way when you've gotten a test and you're like, I have no idea what to do with this? That is never a good feeling. Your students shouldn't be guessing what they're supposed to do on assessment. You should be very clear about that. You need to have a comfortable testing environment, whatever that may be. So you don't want your classroom to be too crowded. You don't want it to have too many distractions. What can you do to make sure that it is a comfortable environment in which students can be assessed? And reduce distractions. So think about noise level, think about how you want students to pass up their exams when they're finished. It can be quite distracting when students are keep getting up and turning in their exams and sitting back down, or chatter if they're getting up and leaving. So think about what you can do to reduce those distractions. You do want to keep an eye on your students while they're taking their assessments. This is not a time to sit there and look at your phone or grade papers. It is a time to either rotate around the room sporadically or keep an eye on what's happening. Now, you don't want to do it to a point to where your students are anxious because you're staring at them, but I'm sure you know what I mean, to make sure that you're being observant and you know what's going on. Then, when it comes to analyzing your results, so once they've taken the test, that's not it. Your job's not completely done. There are still things that need to occur. You want to score them and get them back to the students quickly. Especially your more anxious students are going to be very eager to see how they did. So do what you can to quickly get those scores back. Do not do any sort of public postings or comparisons of students. Now, it's fine if you want to give a mean score. It's fine if you want to give a range so that students can do some sort of a normative comparison, but you don't want to do anything that would embarrass students. I don't think this is a problem so much today, but I know when I was in college, after you would take an exam, they would actually post all of the scores outside of your classroom or your teacher's office, and you would go and look. And prior to FERPA regulations, sometimes they would simply put your name and your score, and anyone could see how you did. Let's see, discuss the results. You shouldn't just let the exam go by and never say a word about it, whether it's an exam or a paper or a presentation. Talk about the results with your students. Let them know perhaps what the mean score was. What were the strengths and weaknesses? What can you say about the assessment tool itself based upon your how you analyze the results? And give them some positive feedback. Let them know what they've done well. Then you're going to want to provide some positive comments. So we've seen that exams and other types of assessments can be stressful. So not only will the positive comments perhaps alleviate some of their anxiety for the future, but also you want to reinforce what they did well. Now, obviously, this meme here is meant to be an example of what not to do. So again, focus on the positive. And make notes for yourself for future revisions. This goes into that category of reflective practice, that none of us are perfect as teachers and we always need to improve. After your assessments, make notes to yourself. What were your students' weaknesses? How might you improve upon that in the future? What about the weaknesses or strengths of the assessment tool itself? Were there some bad questions that you might want to rethink or get rid of? All right, so grading and reporting. When it comes to grading, this is a big part of your job as an instructor, and the type of grading that you do will vary based upon your subject area as well as your grade level. And there are some options on how you want to deal with grading student homework. Obviously, the most common one is teacher graded. So teacher graded is just what it sounds like, where you are the one who are collecting, grading the homeworks, and passing them back. This is the best approach. Not only does it improve student learning and improve student effort, but it's very time consuming for the teacher. So if you think about a typical high school teacher, you might have 6 different class periods, perhaps 6 different groups of students. Let's say there's 25 students in a class and they are turning in one homework a class period. That is still 150 different homework assignments that you would be collecting. It can be voluminous. So yes, it is time consuming on the part of the teacher, but students do put more effort into their work when they know that the teacher is actually going through and grading it. And by putting more effort in, hence that is the improved learning. But as a teacher, you might end up feeling this way. It can be quite challenging when you have, again, stacks and stacks of homeworks and papers to grade. And I thought this was funny. Not sure if papers are getting better or if I'm grading easier. Sometimes you will find that at the beginning of a stack of papers, you're a bit more critical and taking more time. And then after you're, let's say 9 hours in, you might find that you start getting a little bit easier. If you feel that happening, that's when you need to stop and take a break. So that way you're still being a reliable assessor and giving your same effort to all of the papers. So grading. There are some things you can do to reduce your workload. You could grade select samples of work. And again, here we're still talking about when the teacher is the one who's grading the homework. So these are some options so that you don't feel like this guy here. So grade select samples. So rather than grading every single homework, all 150 of them, maybe you do every other one. Or maybe you do 1/4 of each class. Okay, so you do a select sampling, a random sampling of each one. Now, obviously, then you'd have to determine how you're going to handle that, if that is a grade in the grade book or what you're going to do. But that still doesn't give you the full picture. You still don't see how the whole class is doing. Now, if you want to do that in a way so that you can put a grade in the grade book, you could say, okay, this week I'm going to grade A through J. Next week it's going to be, the other half of the alphabet and so on. But still, you're not getting the full picture at each time. You could collect at random intervals. So they might have homework every night, but they may not know which day of the week you're going to collect it. And maybe one week you collect it on Tuesday, another week you collect it on Thursday. Then still they'll be putting that effort in, but again, they don't know when it is you'll be collecting it. And that way you won't have 150 assignments perhaps every night. Now, this can reduce student effort unless you are frequently collecting it. I thought this was funny. What is an extreme sport? Doing your homework while the teacher is collecting it, because sometimes that will happen as well. So, you can also just give them credit for completion. So you could collect it. Simply look over at top to bottom. It doesn't take long for you to get a sense of what completion looks like and whether or not the student did give effort to their homework. And you could give perhaps a pass-fail or some sort of a more simplistic grading system just to see if they have completed it or put the effort in. But again, that can reduce effort in some ways for the students and also reduces the amount of feedback that they'll be getting from you. All right, so what else can you do? Well, instead of being the teacher who's grading the homework, some teachers use this method. Students swap homeworks and grade one another's homework. Well, it does use up class time, which can be a hindrance because we only have so many hours in the day. And now you might be able to write it off as a learning activity because the students might be learning from grading one another's homework, but that is something you would need to consider. Self-grading by students. That can also be problematic because it can encourage cheating. So if you're being asked to grade your own homework, you might perhaps change grades on it while you're doing that. The same thing can happen when students are swapping, just like SpongeBob down here is saying. So again, having students do the grading is somewhat problematic, let alone with the idea of student privacy. You might have some students who would be embarrassed to swap with another student if perhaps they're doing poorly in the class. But again, that is an option and some teachers do choose to use that. All right, finally, our last topic is going to be evaluating your assessment, because in the spirit of in the spirit of reflective practice or self-reflection, you should not only be looking at your teaching for improvement, but also looking at your assessments. So when you're finished with an exam, especially a multiple choice exam, it's a good idea to do an item analysis. The item analysis can help you understand how many students missed each question. It can also help you determine which of your questions were easy, which of them were difficult. And if you see ones that look too difficult, if they were missed by a vast majority of students, you want to take a better look at those questions and see if perhaps they were poorly written. And then what I always used to do, especially when I would do my item analysis by hand and then see the students face to face afterwards, I would go over the most commonly missed questions. Now, thankfully, Blackboard will do an item analysis for you. So here you can see one from a fairly recent exam. You can see the average score. You can see the average amount of time that it took for students to take the exam. This gives you an idea of the item discrimination level as well as the difficulty level. And then I always take a look at those questions that are identified as hard, which means that they were missed by a large number of students, to see if there was a problem with any of those questions or perhaps they were just challenging. So this can give you an idea of how easy your test is, as well as how your students did on it. Now, it is a little bit harder with these kinds of item analyses to look at the commonly missed questions, because as you know, for instance, with my exams, I have a very large pool of questions and not everyone gets the same ones. All right, with evaluating your assessment, one thing you can do if you really want to take a good look at it is to look at the item difficulty index. Now, I mentioned this when showing you the Blackboard one. So this is the percent of students who answer an item correctly. Okay, so I thought that was kind of funny. In the future, please refrain from answering duh on the easier questions, because you will have some that are easier than others. Typically, if 70% or higher of the students got the question correct, it is considered to be an easy question. And typically, if 30% or less get it correct, it's considered to be a hard or a difficult question. Now, here's something. I saw this meme and I couldn't help but to include it. It says, so here's what we covered, and here's everything we left out, because there is so much to cover in the world of assessment. As I mentioned previously, I used to be an assessment director, and I've attended a multitude of assessment conferences, and I could do a whole course on it. We've just touched the proverbial tip of the iceberg to give you a basic understanding of assessment. You will learn more about it as you go forward during your time here in the College of Education. So, believe it or not, dun dun dun, we are actually finished. I know I've said this before, but I want to say it again. You guys have done an excellent job. I'm very proud of each of you. You've worked hard, you've stayed on top of your deadlines, and hopefully fairly soon you're going to go to well-deserved break. So up ahead, we'll be having our final exams, we'll be having projects, but before you know it, there's going to be that light at the end of the tunnel and you're going to be done. So thank you one last time for your time and your attention and everything else. Until next time.